Beletrina, v živo.
Drage gledalke in gledalci, danes je z nami moldavska pisateljica Tatiane Țîbuleac. Did I pronounce that all right?
Yes, perfect.
Ki gostuje v okviru festivala Fabula s svojim drugim romanom Stekleni vrt. Ta je pred časom, oziroma zdaj že pred nekaj leti, prejel nagrado Evropske unije za književnost. V slovenščino ga je iz romuščine prevedel Aleš Mustar, za prevode iz ruščine pa je poskrbela Sara Špelec. V romanu spoznamo protagonistko Lastovčko, ki je odrasla v eni od moldavskih sirotišnic, nato pa jo k sebi vzame Rusinja Tamara Pavlovna. Skupaj nato nekaj časa prodajata prazne steklenice, Tamara pa jo sčasoma celo zasužnji. Lastovčka sčasoma odraste, spremljamo jo skozi različna obdobja njenega življenja, ko postane ginekologinja in naposled mati. Roman pa se dogaja v 80. letih prejšnjega stoletja, ko je bilo slutiti razpad Sovjetske zveze. Naša gostja pa je sicer v Kišinjevu diplomirala iz novinarstva in komunikologije, nekaj časa delovala kot novinarka, danes pa živi v Parizu. Več o Steklenem vrtu pa zdaj po angleško. Tatiana, right before we started this conversation, you told me that it's a novel that you wrote a long time ago and that now you are in a way rediscovering it. What have you learned about it in these past days when you're doing so many interviews?
Well, unfortunately, I'm doing quite a lot of interviews lately and I'm writing less, which is a bad thing in general. It's just, for me, it's interesting how people from different countries receive the same book. And I'm very curious how it's going to be in Slovenia, because I consider myself extremely lucky to have such a wonderful translator as Aleš Mustar. Yesterday, I was talking to someone and they said that they loved my book, which is probably a direct compliment to Aleš, because usually, you could like my books, you can find them great, but love a book, it's quite strong, which means that probably he wrote something from his own name in my books. To be completely honest is, I think that every time I meet readers from other cultures, from other languages, it's just a very interesting feedback for me, because the realities of a country are different and they see different things maybe in my book, because I was writing it as a Moldovan and also as a migrant already. So it's after 30 years, nearly after Soviet Union disappeared. So it's a book which can be read probably in a different keynote every year, especially with the war we have now in the region, because that changed something. It talks about things which could maybe prevent a war if people would be more careful with them at the time.
For example, what?
I was wondering if we didn't try to forget and forgive the past too easily. Because sometimes in order to advance in life, you need to sort of make peace with certain things which bothered you in past, and maybe that is a sort of problem for that part of the world in general, that we try to forget or we forgot too fast, because sometimes forgetting is helpful, but sometimes it means a slow death as well.
Now, the protagonist lives and is growing up in a time when the Soviet Union is about to fall apart, but when Russification was strong in Moldova, and you also grew up in that time. However, how you yourself speak of the Russian language, that is, along with its culture, dealing with a lot of struggles nowadays because of the war that we have in Ukraine. As I got lost here.
I understood your question. We should be able usually to separate a language from politics, politics from a country. We should be able to do that. And that's the correct way to do. We should put music, theater, language on one side and war and politics on another. But can we do that? Can we really do that? That's another question. I find it difficult. And saying that, I must say that I grew up with Russian as a second language, sometimes as a first language in Chisinau, because as you said, that those were the years that everything was quite Russified. But now I find it quite difficult to look at the same films, at the same theater plays. I find it difficult to approach it with the same indulgence, with the same feeling. This is happening, and it's normal to happen. It doesn't have to happen with everyone, and you can't oblige someone, you can't dictate to someone for him to take this attitude. It's happening with me, and during this year I understood that it's very easy to ask other people to feel like you, but that's not going to happen only because you do that. So that is my personal approach to this phenomena. I'm not saying that I'm going to burn the Russian books, which I still have at home and which meant a lot to me, but it seems to me somehow forced and unfair to read them the way I did many years ago.
But you also said in some previous interviews about the book, and that's also what I found interesting, is that it sort of helped you deal with your own identity. In what way, and what did you discover, and how are you then maybe passing this on already to your children? Because you did write about some things that were also dividing within your own family at home.
Yes, I mean, for me, I live in Paris for many years, and my children speak, of course, first of all, French, second, English, because their father is English, and it's easier for them probably to speak English than Romanian, which requires more effort and more convincing. But it's important for me to pass to them the story of my family, the story of my country. I want them to be able to understand this not only from, newspapers when they will grow up and they will try to. I want them to live with this. I want them to understand the changes we are going through. So I wrote this book also to understand a bit of who I became now, how much from my upbringing became the way of life, how do I identify myself living in another country completely. And that was also, I think, a question which you would find very often coming up in discussions with my generation, which is now mainly migrants. Because Moldova, as you know, it has a very high rate of migration, and basically adults of my age are now, let's put it like that, trying to form a life, to start a new life in different countries. So for me, that is, it's an important moment in my life to understand all these things.
Now, you mentioned that nowadays many Moldovans are migrants. In this book particularly, you speak of a so-called generation in between. That's how you called it. And what struck me most, probably also because right before starting to read the book, I had seen this very sad movie about orphanages in the east of Ukraine, is that you put your protagonist in an orphanage. She's an orphan, then growing up, her life is not getting any easier. Is that also to do with maybe the journalist work that you did, where you were
Yes, it's true, because I wasn't, I didn't know that life so well at the time, because I wasn't an orphan.
Yes.
And the monstrosity of an orphanage, this is it. I mean, you don't contact with people from outside. You are put in an institution and you live there for 10 years and then you come out. So, of course, I was able to have a peek of that life only after I became a journalist. But I felt that I wanted her to be an orphan because sometimes, you know, Moldovans, we always felt like we are not really accepted anywhere, because as a neighbor of Romania and historically being part of Romania, we were never really considered Romanians. By Russians, we never were considered Russians. So we sort of had this feeling of unbelonging anywhere. So I think that maybe, even if I didn't do it in purpose, but that metaphor of an orphan girl, an orphan child came somehow, you know, by itself, nearly.
So she as a metaphor for Moldova.
I think so, yes. And I suppose I didn't write in purpose a plan to make a metaphor and to follow. It happened, but then at one point I kind of saw it and I left it there. So I think it's not incorrect to read this book, keeping in mind that metaphor as well. Yeah.
And why did you find it important to surround her with mostly female characters?
That's a good question. Again, I mean, I've answered it many times. It's probably because in my first novel I used a male voice to narrate, but also because I saw a lot of women around me when I grew up. Because in those times, in this kind of typical old yards where you would have, you know, many families living together, we didn't really have so many men present. You know, you would still see women nearly at every level, like, you know, house, cooking, education, working. So I had a feeling that I'm sort of growing up in a nice matriarchat, in the sense of women were the ones who were deciding everything. And of course we had fathers or brothers, but they were somehow in a different role. So for me, my childhood is linked very strongly to this community of women.
Would you say Moldova is a woman?
Moldovan society is relying heavily on women in all times. And I think women are those who keep Moldova going.
Thank you very much, Tatiana.
Thank you.
Vam pa hvala za pozornost in lep pozdrav.
Beletrina, v živo.